You lived through an entire childhood before you could even speak. You were born. You opened your eyes for the first time. You heard a voice that had been muffled for months, suddenly clear. You learned what a face was, what warmth felt like. You took your first steps. You said your first word, and you remember none of it. Not one clear image, not one sound, not one moment. The easy explanation is that your brain simply wasn't ready yet, too young, too undeveloped to bother recording any of it. That explanation is almost entirely wrong. Your infant brain wasn't failing to record your life. It was recording constantly. Something else destroyed the evidence. In the late 1800s, Sigmund Freud gave this phenomenon a name: infantile amnesia. But naming something isn't the same as explaining it. And for the better part of a century, nobody could prove infants were even capable of holding on to memories in the first place. Then, in the 1970s and 80s, a psychologist named Carolyn Rovey Collier stumbled onto the proof almost entirely by accident. She was trying to finish her dissertation with a fussy infant son at home. To keep him calm while she worked, she tied a ribbon from his ankle to a mobile hanging above his crib. He quickly figured out that kicking made the mobile move, and he loved it. Rovey Collier noticed something else, though. Days later, without the ribbon reattached, he still kicked, expecting the mobile to respond. He remembered. She turned that accident into a formal experiment. Infants as young as 2 months old could recall the connection between kicking and movement, days later. 6-month-olds held onto it for up to 2 weeks. So the memory capacity was there. Infants could learn, they could store it, they could recall it, at least for a while. But none of that memory survives into adulthood. Every trace eventually disappears completely. For decades, that gap remained a mystery. Part of the answer is structural. Deep in your brain sits a small, curved structure called the hippocampus, the engine that converts a lived moment into a memory you can consciously replay later. In adults, it works closely with the prefrontal cortex to tag, store, and retrieve entire episodes. In infants, that system is severely unfinished. The connections linking the hippocampus to the rest of the brain are still under construction, and key internal circuits don't fully mature until somewhere between ages 2 and 4. Your infant brain could form short-term impressions. It just couldn't reliably move them into long-term, retrievable storage the way an adult brain does. That's a real part of the story. But it's only part of it, and honestly, what comes next is stranger. Here's a way to picture the scale of it. An adult hippocampus is a fully wired, functioning network. An infant's is closer to a construction site, with the scaffolding still going up around it. In 2014, a research team based at Toronto's Hospital for Sick Children, led by Sheena Jocelyn and Paul Frankland, with lead author Caitlin Akers, published a study with a strange hypothesis. What if the very process that builds your brain is also what erases your earliest memories? In the first years of life, your hippocampus produces new neurons at an extraordinary rate, a process called neurogenesis. That growth is essential. It's what wires the circuits you'll rely on for the rest of your life. But the researchers suspected there was a cost. Every time a new neuron wires itself into an existing circuit, it can disrupt the very connections already stored there, the ones holding old memories in place. To test it, they turned to mice. When they artificially boosted neurogenesis in adult mice, those mice started forgetting things they'd already learned. When they slowed neurogenesis in infant mice, those infant mice held on to memories for unusually long, and then came the detail that made the case airtight. Some species, like guinea pigs and degus, are born with almost all of their neurons already in place. Very little postnatal neurogenesis at all. Those infant animals didn't show this rapid forgetting, until researchers artificially raised their neurogenesis rate. Then, right on cue, the same infantile amnesia appeared. The conclusion was hard to avoid. Your baby brain wasn't too weak to hold on to memories. It was too busy growing. The same explosion of new cells that built your mind also, quietly, overwrote the memories stored inside it. There's a third piece, and it might be the strangest of all. To form what psychologists call an autobiographical memory, the kind where you're the central character in a story you can consciously replay, you need something most people take completely for granted: a sense of self. You need to understand that you exist as a distinct person, separate from the world happening around you. Researchers Mark Howe and Mary Courage argue that this piece is critical, and it simply isn't in place yet in very young infants. The classic test for this is almost absurdly simple. Place a small dot of rouge on a baby's nose, then put them in front of a mirror. Before around 18 months of age, babies treat their own reflection like a stranger. They don't reach for the mark. After 18 months, most do. They understand, for the first time, that the person in the mirror is them. And that moment tracks closely with the earliest age autobiographical memories can begin forming at all. In other words, you can't remember being a baby partly because there was no continuous you yet to have those experiences happen to. The final piece is language. Developmental psychologist Catherine Nelson spent years studying how children build lasting memories, and her conclusion was that language doesn't just describe a memory after the fact, it structures it while it's still being formed. Before you could speak, your experiences existed only as raw sensory fragments, sounds, textures, emotion, light, with no framework to organize them. Once children start talking, and especially once adults start narrating shared experiences back to them, remember when we went to the park? Their ability to form lasting, retrievable memories improves dramatically. And this isn't just theory. Psychologist Chi Wang at Cornell found that the average age of a person's earliest memory actually shifts depending on culture. In Western cultures, where parents frequently narrate a child's experiences back to them, first memories tend to begin around age 3.5. Among the Maori of New Zealand, whose oral storytelling tradition places enormous emphasis on personal history, average first memories reach back as far as age 2.5. In cultures where early narratives focused less on the individual child specifically, first memories often don't begin until closer to age 4. The culture that raised you appears to shape how far back your own memory can actually reach. So here's what actually happened to your earliest years. Your hippocampus wasn't finished being built. The flood of new neurons required to build it tore through the very connections trying to hold your first memories in place. You had no stable sense of self yet to anchor those experiences to, and you had no language yet to give them a structure that could survive. It wasn't one single cause. It was 4 separate systems, all failing to preserve your past for the exact same reason. They were far too busy building your future. Every person you've ever met carries the same blank space at the start of their life. Not because their brain failed them, because it was doing something more important than remembering. It was becoming them.